outside and enjoy the environment. You lay down a blanket and have a meal with your friends and family at your favorite outdoor location. You can have a picnic at a park or at the beach. You can have one in the mountains or the forest. Possibly the most universal symbol of peace and friendship, eating together in a group usually ends in a great time. Sometimes, though, you're the one that gets chewed up. The Highline coal mine was near Thermopolis, Wyoming. Three men, John Hoagland, Byron Joe, and Jack Boyce, were finishing up their shift in the mine on the evening of December 6, 1944, when they heard what sounded like a shotgun being fired in the distance. Now, in rural Wyoming, the sounds of gunfire were nothing to be alarmed at, and the men didn't even give it a second thought as they continued finishing up their duties. Less than a minute later, the men heard a whistling above their heads and then a loud explosion. They initially thought the explosion could have been something in the mine, but soon they noticed a cloud of smoke rising from something in the air about 1,000 feet up. They walked up a nearby hill to get a better look at it, and there they saw what looked like a parachute descending in the sky. They wondered if someone had ejected from a plane, but it was too dark to make out what was hanging below the chute. The wind eventually blew it away from them, and it disappeared out of sight. Lewis Hartman had just finished bedding down his flock of sheep when the blast frightened the animals and sent them scurrying down the hill. As Lewis chased after them, he noticed an egg-shaped object falling from the sky. He watched it fall to the ground, but didn't see exactly where it landed until a ball of flames shot into the sky. He rounded his sheep back up and decided that it was too dark to investigate the object. The following morning, when he trekked out to where he thought the object landed, he found a 2-foot circle of black rock and the strong odor of gunpowder. Many other people in town had seen the object, and it became a common theory that there was a plane crash and the pilot had ejected. But after numerous searches, neither the plane nor the pilot could be located. The only thing found were scraps of metal, some of which looked like they had come from a bomb. Someone from a nearby military installation took the metal fragments back to the base to have them examined by an ordnance specialist. They would soon be included with a quickly growing list of other parts that had been found across the United States at the end of 1944. The U.S. government had pieced together that the Japanese were sending balloon bombs across the Pacific Ocean, and they were being found in Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, Oregon, California, and across Canada. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, they thought that they were going to destroy the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet, and that show of force would cause the American government to end the sanctions they had placed on Japan. What they ended up doing was just pissing us the fuck off, and we declared war against them. Then we sent all of the ships they missed across the Pacific and attacked them on their turf. After a surprise bombing of 5 different Japanese cities on April 18, 1942, Japanese leaders were fuming that the war was taking place on their soil and the U.S. was sitting across the ocean untouched. The Imperial General Headquarters demanded scientists and engineers develop a way to serve a retaliatory strike against the U.S. mainland. They began dreaming of a plane that could fly all the way to the west coast of the U.S. from Japan, where it would drop bombs on major cities before crashing the plane into high-value targets. But the plan never got off the ground. Pun intended. They did develop a plane that could land in the water, refuel, and then take off from the deck of a submarine. They tested the plane off the coast of Oregon and successfully dropped incendiary bombs in the Siskiyou National Forest, but due to the recent rain, they didn't do much damage. Soon, engineers revived a past research project that would use paper balloons to send bombs across the ocean to the U.S. This was one of a handful of unique secret weapons that scientists were working on. Each weapon had a code name that ended with the word Go, which is a Japanese numbering suffix. A small unmanned tank was called Igo. A rocket-propelled explosive was called Rogo, and the balloon bomb was called Fugo, which gets its name from the Japanese word for balloon, fusen. The US government had discovered balloon bombs which were falling around the country, but they didn't want the Japanese to know that their balloons were even making it to the US mainland, so they kept the entire discovery a secret, including to the American people. On May 5, 1945, Reverend Archie Mitchell and his wife Elsie were driving up Dairy Creek Road to the forest on the southern face of Gerhardt Mountain, near Bly, Oregon. They had 5 children from their Sunday school with them and were headed for a day in the forest where they would fish and have a picnic. Elsie had spent the previous day preparing food for the trip, even making a chocolate cake for dessert. Being 5 months pregnant, she was having second thoughts about going on the trip because she hadn't been feeling well, but when she got up on the morning of the 5th, she felt much better, so she helped pack up the car and off they went. This part of the mountain was home to old-growth white fir and ponderosa pines. Open meadows of aspen and wildflowers lured deer, elk, and a variety of birds. As soon as they got out of the car, the children ran to a nearby creek. This is where they would catch rainbow and brook trout while fishing that day. As Elsie followed the kids, one of them hung back as she noticed something on a hill by the creek. As she walked closer, she called to the other children to take a look. Meanwhile, Archie was digging in the trunk, retrieving the fishing poles and picnic food when Elsie called to him to look at what they had found. She said, "It looks like some kind of balloon." As Richie turned around to look at them, one of the kids bent down and tried to pick up a device attached to the balloon. A massive explosion shook the entire forest, throwing Elsie and the children away from the center of the blast. There were 3 Forest Service workers near the road, and when they heard and felt the explosion, they ran to the area to see what happened. Archie was kneeling by Elsie. Her clothes were on fire and he was trying to put them out. Near her was a crater in the earth a foot deep, 2 feet wide and 5 feet long. Around the crater were the mangled bodies of 5 children. 14-year-old Dick Patsk, 13-year-old Jay Gifford, 13-year-old Edward Engine, and 11-year-old Sherman Shoemaker had all died instantly. Dick's sister, 13-year-old Joan Patsk, had been standing behind the boys so she was partially shielded from the blast. That only gave her a few minutes of life before she succumbed to her wounds. Elsie hung on for a few more minutes before dying as well. The forest workers drove to Bly to alert authorities. Soon the sheriff and the coroner were on the mountain and they were able to move Elsie and Joan's bodies, but the boys' bodies were too close to the device. They had to wait until an ordnance specialist from a nearby naval air station arrived and cleared the area. He would end up finding and deactivating 4 thermite incendiary devices. While that happened, calls were being made to Army intelligence at Fort Lewis in Washington State. Once the site was safe, the coroner was able to take the remaining bodies away. The military came in and collected the remains of the bomb, as well as fragments that had embedded in trees and pieces that had traveled 400 feet away. Despite this balloon bomb causing casualties on the U.S. mainland, the War Department insisted on keeping the news of the bombs a secret. The coroner was only allowed to list the victim's cause of death as an explosion of unannounced cause. The Japanese launched 9,000 balloons, and it's estimated that 1,000 of them successfully made it to the United States. Around 300 of the devices were found all over the country. Most were found in the Pacific Northwest, but some were found as far east as Iowa. Very few of them worked at all. A few started small fires, but didn't lead to any extensive damage. Only one would cause casualties. These were the only 6 casualties on the U.S. mainland that were the result of World War II. The next time you pack up a picnic and set out into the great outdoors, be careful of what you touch and mind where you step, because you never know what might be waiting to feed on you. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on and hit like, rate it, or leave us a comment. Join us next week where we'll take you somewhere sinister.
In 1966, a well-known scientist released a book with information that could impact everyone on Earth. But before anyone could read it, it was classified by the CIA. We only learned about it a few years ago when it was declassified. But the CIA only released 57 pages of the original 284-page manuscript. And those pages have been, in the CIA's own words, sanitized. Now, why does the CIA think this book is so dangerous that they had to hide it from the public for 60 years and continue to hide most of it? Well, it's because the man who wrote it describes the end of the world. In 1966, former McDonnell Douglas engineer Dr. Chan Thomas released a book called The Adam and Eve Story. Now, that title might sound like he's being cute, but he's actually being literal. This book is about the end of the world as we know it.
Hey.
What's up?
Is this one of those stories where you scare the hell out of us? Did you wrap it up with a happy ending?
Well, you're half right.
Oh no. If I soil my bowl again, you gotta remember to edit that out.
They didn't know you had an accident. You just told them.
Well,
Thomas presents evidence of a coming shift in the Earth's poles that creates a cataclysm. And Thomas says these pole shifts are cyclical, that on regular intervals, a disaster wipes out almost all human life, and we start over again in the Stone Age. He says we're actually the 6th advanced civilization to evolve on Earth. There may have been even more civilizations that have been here, but the further back you go, the harder it is to know for sure because some of these civilizations occupied continents that no longer exist. Now, Thomas isn't the first scientist to publish this theory. In 1958, almost 10 years before the Adam and Eve story, Charles Hapgood published The Earth's Shifting Crust, which discussed the Earth crustal displacement hypothesis. This theory says that sometimes the Earth spins really fast and the continents are rearranged. When Hapgood proposed the idea of continental drift, it was called pseudoscience, but Hapgood had his supporters. In fact, Albert Einstein wrote the forewords for 2 of his books. Now, of course, we know that Hapgood was right. The continents do move. They drift apart and collide together over and over again, and have done so for almost 4 billion years. Pangaea was the supercontinent that broke apart to form the land masses that exist today. But before Pangaea, there was the supercontinent Gondwana, which existed for 400 million years. Before Gondwana, there was Pannotia. Before that, Rodinia, Columbia, Atlantica, Arctica, Kennerland, Ur, and Valbara. These were all supercontinents that eventually broke apart and reformed. After working with Einstein and a few other scientists, Charles Hapgood released the book The Path of the Pole as an update to his previous theories. In this book, Hapgood suggested that the Earth's poles are constantly moving. Again, this piece of pseudoscience was eventually proven true. Hapgood believed that a pole shift between 15 and 40 degrees occurred around 9600 BC, or 11,600 years ago.
Younger Dryas.
Younger Dryas. Now, the Piri-Reis map is something that has baffled scientists for hundreds of years. On the Piri-Reis map is the continent of Antarctica. But Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820, and Piri-Reis claimed the information on his map came from much older maps. If Charles Hapgood was right and the Earth's axis was shifted 15 degrees from where it is now, Antarctica wouldn't be completely covered in ice. Hapgood believed an Ice Age civilization, long forgotten, mapped the coast thousands of years ago. Though many of Hapgood's theories have proven to be true, the Ice Age pole shift is still controversial. We do know the poles shift over time. We also know the continents drift over a very long period of time. But Dr. Chan Thomas, in his book The Adam and Eve Story, says the shift happens in less than a day. Chan Thomas describes in detail what this will be like, and it's worse than any Hollywood disaster movie ever conceived. Far worse.